in the name of personal injury law.
We often hear about attorneys handling wrongful death cases, but people really don't understand what's involved with a wrongful death case and how they're handled. So today I have with me attorney Steve Sinas. He's a partner at the Sinas Dramus Law Firm doing personal injury law. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
So first question for you is, who can pursue a wrongful death case?
Whenever you have a death, you obviously have a huge loss. But the wrongful death statute here in Michigan is a specific statute that provides a family the right to pursue a wrongful death action if there would have been an underlying personal injury case. So if there's an auto negligence case, if there's a medical malpractice case, if there's a premises liability case, any of those situations that leads to someone's death could give rise to an action under the Michigan wrongful death statute.
So who can pursue a wrongful death case in Michigan?
In order to pursue a wrongful death case, you first have to open an estate in the name of the decedent, and that has to occur through the probate court. So there's a process to open the estate that the family must get underway, and in opening the estate, you have to decide who will be appointed personal representative of the estate. When the family can agree on the person who should be appointed that personal representative, it's an easy process. There can be disputes about which family member serves that role, but the person who becomes personal representative then has the authority to hire legal counsel to pursue a wrongful death case, and also has the authority to settle the case. Now, the case is subject to the probate court's supervision and approval. So if you have the wrongful death case pending in another court, in order to get approval of the settlement, you have to go to the probate court and seek its approval. And then it also has to approve how any proceeds from the settlement would be distributed between the family members.
So who is the person that's usually picked to be the personal representative, the one that's actually going to be pursuing the wrongful death case?
There are oftentimes families who just agree that a certain family member is in the best position to be the personal representative. But like I said, if there are disputes along the way, the court will ultimately make the decision about what family member is best suited to serve as personal representative.
So what damages are recoverable in Michigan if you have a wrongful death case that's successful?
The damages include compensating certain family members for their loss of society and companionship with the decedent. That includes the person's spouse, their children, their brothers and sisters, their parents, and their grandparents. And when it comes to their right to recover these damages, each person's relationship with the decedent needs to be analyzed and considered. If they have a very close relationship, their right to damages may be greater than a family member who wasn't that close with the person. So every time you have a wrongful death case, you need to assess the relationships with the decedent and decide what is the way to allocate the proceeds from the settlement between the family members. And so that's part of these cases. And there's also the economic damage side. And that's where you have the dependents, such as children or the spouse, claiming the loss of economic support to the household in the form of income, other services to the household. There can be various expenses and economic damages that can be pursued in a wrongful death case. I should also note that the underlying type of case, whether it's an auto case or a medical malpractice case, it can affect the types and ranges of damages that can actually be recovered in a wrongful death case.
Okay. And what parties can be sued for wrongful death?
The parties that can be sued for wrongful death are the parties that somehow contributed to the wrongful conduct that led to the person's injuries and or death. And when it comes down to the assessment, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're dealing with a motor vehicle crash, you're talking about whether the driver was negligent in how they operated the vehicle. But also in that context, the owner of the motor vehicle can be held liable. And if the at-fault driver was operating the vehicle in the scope of his or her employment, her employer can be held liable. So you have to look at the underlying case and decide who could be held liable under that type of case. And then those are the defendants that would also be subject to the wrongful death case.
So how long does a family have to file a wrongful death case in Michigan?
It's typically governed by the statute of limitations that applies to the underlying claim. So if it's an auto negligence case, you have 3 years. Medical malpractice, there's a 2-year statute of limitations with some other nuances to it. Premises liability, there's 3 years. So you look at the underlying cause of action, And then there can also be an extension of that statute of limitations depending on when the death occurs and when the personal representative is appointed. But all families should understand there is a statute of limitations and you should look into your rights sooner than later.
For wrongful death cases involving motor vehicle crashes, how are they different than other types of wrongful death cases?
In a situation where you have a person who was killed as a result of a motor vehicle crash, the crash will be governed by the Michigan auto no-fault insurance law. And so the wrongful death case then has to be worked through as a case under the Michigan no-fault insurance law with the wrongful death statute being considered, but it ultimately turns into a case where you have to decide what the person could recover under the Michigan no-fault insurance law, and then decide how the wrongful death statute also allows other rights to damages, and there can be some nuances to that. So when you're dealing with an auto crash involving a death, you have to be both aware of the no-fault insurance law and the Michigan wrongful death statute.
So can you tell us what the typical timeline is for a Michigan wrongful death case?
A timeline for a wrongful death case is very much affected by the facts and circumstances of the case. If there are disputes over negligence and who was at fault for the crash, there can be oftentimes a reason to litigate sooner than later, and that litigation may be more contentious. If the underlying conduct is obviously negligent and the parties know that there's going to be liability, there can be more of an effort to try to resolve the case before a lawsuit's filed. That process can sometimes take a long time in and of itself, but often can lead to a settlement without unnecessarily contentious and lengthy litigation. So the ultimate answer is that it varies on the case and the circumstances of the case, but families should expect that if negligence is being fought over, they're probably in for a process in the courts that could take up to a year or 2 years to reach finality.
And folks need an attorney to help them, through this process and understand what they're facing.
Yes, I would tell any family member or friend to get an attorney because you are dealing with complex issues and legal standards that need to be followed. So there's a lot to think about, and you also don't want to stress about it while you're grieving over the loss of a loved one.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Law Firm.